Are there too many townhouses in New Zealand? Look, if you're living in one of New Zealand's major cities, you've probably seen a ton of townhouses being built. And that's leading some property investors to worry that now there are too many of them. So you might be thinking, is there an oversupply of townhouses? And if I buy one, will I be stuck with a property that doesn't go up in value or will have a low rental return? Well, that's why in this video, you're going to learn, number one, how many townhouses are actually being built and where, whether there are too many townhouses based on facts and data, and then thirdly, if there is or isn't an oversupply, why might that be the case? A townhouse is a property that fits the area of a standalone house onto a smaller section. That way you can fit the same amount of people on a smaller plot of land. They're often 2 to 3 stories, typically share walls with their neighbours, but that's not always the case. Now today, townhouses are making up a larger proportion of the properties being built in New Zealand. You know, 10 years ago, townhouse development was at its least popular. Only 6 properties in every 100 consented were townhouses. Today, it's 40 in 100, over 6 times higher. And in places like Auckland, Christchurch, Lower Hutt and Hamilton, townhouses make up over half of the properties being consented. Hence that question about whether there's an oversupply coming. But that doesn't mean that townhouses are popular everywhere. Over the last 12 months, there was only 1 townhouse consent in Clutha district, and there were only 3 townhouses consented over in Kaikoura. So because townhouses tend to be built in the major cities, we're going to focus our question about oversupply on Auckland and Christchurch, where the most townhouses are being built. So, are we building too many townhouses? To figure out whether there's an oversupply, we should ask ourselves, if there was an oversupply of townhouses, what would we expect to see? What would that oversupply look like? Well, firstly, we'd see townhouses take way longer to sell than other types of properties like standalone houses. We'd also probably see townhouses falling in value more quickly than houses. And lastly, we'd also see townhouses not increasing in value as quickly as other property types. So do we see any of that happening within the data? Let's start with whether townhouses take longer to sell. Well, here's the data for Christchurch. You can see that while there have been times where townhouses took longer to sell than houses, over the last 12 years, they've been about the same. Today, townhouses are actually selling more quickly than houses in Christchurch. The trend is pretty similar in Auckland. So there's nothing here that obviously screams to me oversupply, even as more townhouses are hitting the market today. Okay, but let's look at that second factor, house prices. Right now, New Zealand house prices are falling. Now, if there was an oversupply of townhouses, it would be reasonable to assume that townhouses would be falling in value more quickly than houses, right? So do we see that? Here's the Christchurch data. If we look at the annual change in the median sale price for townhouses and houses, we see that prices are moving in the same direction. There are some differences, which is to be expected, like here, where the median price of townhouses increased more quickly than houses, and over here where they increased more slowly. But again, we're not seeing that big fall away in townhouse price growth that we might expect to see if there was truly an oversupply. The third thing we might expect to see if there was an oversupply is townhouses not increasing in value as quickly as houses. Now, in this previous video, we established that houses have tended to increase in value slightly faster than townhouses, and both have increased significantly faster than apartments. So some divergence is to be expected. But have we seen a substantial change in the difference between the two of them? Because that's what could suggest that all this new supply is having an impact. Now, in Christchurch, there's no difference. No evidence of an oversupply whatsoever. In Auckland, there appears to be a difference only over the last 2 years, where in 2021, townhouse sale prices didn't increase as quickly as houses, but today the two are moving back together in lockstep. Now this 1 year period is the only evidence that would hint that all this extra supply is making any jot of difference. But there are 2 important points to make. Number one, while the median sale price of houses increased by 25% at the peak of the market, the median sale price for townhouses still increased by a hefty 15%. And the second point to make is we're using median sale price data here. Now, this is the best that I've got to hand, but it does have some flaws, because it only tracks the average of the houses that actually sold within a particular month. So if a whole heap of cheaper townhouses happen to sell during this 1 year period, the data will be biased down. So on its own, this Auckland data isn't enough to convince me that there is an oversupply of townhouses within that market. But that opens up a really interesting question. Why? Why, with all this building going on, why isn't there an oversupply of townhouses? There are three factors that mean all this townhouse building isn't turning into an oversupply. Number one is housing affordability. Now, as the price of housing has got more expensive, people are looking for more affordable options. Over the last 30 years, townhouses in Auckland have been 20% cheaper than a standalone house. And because more affordable townhouse options are being built today, they're about 30% cheaper on average. Now, that's driving people to change what they buy and move towards townhouses, which creates new demand. The second factor is that people are settling down later, getting married later, having children later in life. Now, that means there are smaller households, more with only 1 or 2 occupants who don't need as much space. And that's where a townhouse can be the right size for those households. So the need for larger family-sized homes is decreasing as people are having smaller families and having them later on in life. And just before you learn the third and final reason, if you like learning about property supported by facts and data, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We release new videos every Monday and Wednesday. And that final reason, the third reason we don't see an oversupply of townhouses, is that most of the properties currently being built are already sold. The banks, in many cases, will not give the developer money to build townhouses unless they've already sold 75%, sometimes up to 100% of those properties. So it's not like a whole heap of these properties are going to hit the market all looking for buyers at the same time. On the whole, they've already been purchased. Now, there will be some people who say, but there's a whole heap of townhouses being built down the street for me, definitely an oversupply coming. Just remember, lots of townhouses being built does not alone prove that there is an oversupply. Because as we've seen, when it comes to townhouses, there's clearly a lot of demand that's meeting that supply.